Um, I was studying urban planning at Iowa State University, and the urban planning program, it it had a very strong design component, but the design component uh, was meant to figure out like how to engage communities, like in a charrette form or whatever. But it never really spilled over into like creative processes, like how do you share information in a neighborhood, or how do you challenge what a neighborhood looks like. So I think initially from urban planning, I just had like curiosity about how art could be used to um, think about urban planning processes. And I ended up taking a pottery class first, and that turned into sculpture, and the sculpture got more and more infused in my urban planning practice, and I started thinking about those things like art and urban planning as a kind of tag team that could maybe help convey better urban planning thoughts or better art thoughts, like the two of them combined were better. You know? And then from there I just kind of kept making and kept studying urban planning. Yeah, I was well, kind of emphatically a clay artist initially. I liked the material and the process and that. But I also was kind of like exploring like art history, and I was always building things because my dad's a builder. I kind of grew up building, but I never included those things in what a person would call an art process. It was more, I think part of what made me mature in clay so quickly was that I was used to using my hands a lot. And so it's only the last few years that my interest in sculpture in general have started to have an influence on the artwork that I make. Like a lot of ceramic artists and wood artists and fiber artists, um, you learn the American canon, and you know, I found myself looking at artists like June Kaneko and Peter Volkis and Paul Soldner, these kind of American ceramic artists. But at some point, you know, my instructor said, you know, you should look at these other places, and they included you know, folk craft from all over the world, and especially the Korean and Japanese had a pretty significant impact on me. And so pretty early on in my ceramic life, I found myself really interested in the tea ceremony and in the idea of ritual and the role that ritual plays kind of in transforming culture, so that you have this like shogunate, these warriors who in this moment are like super spiritual and super sensitive to color and seasons and architecture, to aesthetics. And I just found that so interesting that like these kind of 16th century thugs had like this moment of refine. And so I just really wanted to understand that, because it seemed both super unfamiliar to me and then familiar. And then what are these utensils that they used, and how is it that a culture would build ritual around these things? And then Mississippi is kind of my root. It's who I am. It's what I'm from. And normally, you know, when people talk about the South and they think about art and aesthetics, it's always with this kind of the untrained outside artist. And I thought, you know, there's a lot more to this. And so I found myself just taking this idea of tradition and ritual, and the celebration of artifacts as part of a way of communicating civility, and adding all those things to Mississippi. Because in my mind, Mississippi has nobility and civility, and it has ritual and tradition, but people don't know about it. But creating this myth of Yamaguchi allowed me the opportunity to say to people, there's a kind of tradition that you're not familiar with, and it took all the foods of the South, all the foods that were familiar to me, but they added the Asian other. And there's something that, at least that I found, that when a thing is foreign, they listen differently. They value it differently. There's something about otherness that's not familiar that makes us see it as more special. Now, there may have been a time where otherness meant more savage, but in the case of the East, it meant more special. So Yamaguchi is my hybrid practice that celebrates the best of my history in the South with my preoccupation with how American culture fetishizes otherness. People really want to believe that Yamaguchi is real. And I help them because good stories, well, it just doesn't matter if they're real or not. I find when I'm at restaurants that, you know, groups of people often eat together, homogeneous groups. There are few places in Chicago where there's real mixing. And when the mixing happens, it's kind of perverse. It's like at the club, a particular kind of mixing. And so Play Convergence gave me the opportunity to kind of create space for people to eat together and talk about hard things, but it not feel like too contrived, that the food becomes the mediator. It levels things out. And I wanted to just kind of examine, like, who gets together at the dinner table and why, and how great opportunities happen over dinner, but some people are left out of those opportunities because they're not invited. And so I wanted to make sure that, like, in addition to the usual suspects who can afford a very nice dinner, that there were other people who were wonderful conversationalists and really important people in my life